The blizzard howled outside the small, ramshackle cabin, its icy claws scraping against the walls as if trying to tear its way inside. Kael'thar, exiled warrior of the Zorathian Empire, shivered violently under the thin blanket he had scavenged from the wreckage of his escape pod. His once proud crimson scales, which shimmered like molten metal under the twin suns of his homeworld, now felt dull and brittle in the freezing cold of this cursed human planet. He cursed under his breath, his forked tongue flicking out in frustration. The humans, they were supposed to be primitive, fragile creatures. Yet here he was, stranded on their icy wasteland of a world, struggling to survive while they thrived in their insulated dwellings and heated vehicles. The irony was not lost on him. The door to the cabin creaked open, and a gust of freezing wind swept in, carrying with it a flurry of snow. Kael'thar's golden eyes narrowed as he saw the human female step inside. Her cheeks flushed red from the cold. She was bundled in layers of thick clothing, her breath visible in the frigid air. "Close the door, human," he snarled, his voice deep and guttural, the words tinged with an otherworldly resonance. "Do you wish to kill us both?" The woman, Lena, she had called herself, rolled her eyes and shut the door firmly behind her. "Relax, big guy. I've survived worse storms than this. You're not going to freeze to death on my watch." Kael'thar bared his sharp teeth in a grimace. "Your confidence is misplaced. This planet's cold is unnatural. My kind are not built for such conditions." Lena shrugged off her heavy coat and hung it on a hook by the door. "Yeah, well, you're not on your homeworld anymore. You're lucky I found you when I did. Another hour out there, and you'd have been a popsicle." Kael'thar growled low in his throat but said nothing. She was right and he hated it. He had been wandering the frozen wilderness for days after his pod crashed, his body growing weaker with each passing hour. When Lena had stumbled upon him, half buried in the snow, he had been too exhausted to resist as she dragged him back to her cabin. Now here he was at the mercy of a human. The thought burned like acid in his chest. Lena moved to the small wood stove in the corner of the cabin and added a few logs, stoking the flames until they roared to life. The warmth began to seep into the room, but it did little to ease Kael'thar's discomfort. His body temperature was dropping rapidly, and he could feel his limbs growing stiff and unresponsive. "You're still shivering," Lena observed, glancing over her shoulder at him. "That blanket's not doing much, is it?" Kael'thar glared at her. "Your observation skills are astounding." Lena ignored his sarcasm and crossed the room to stand before him. She placed a hand on his forehead, and he recoiled instinctively, hissing in warning. "Easy, tiger," she said, holding up her hands in a placating gesture. "I'm just trying to help. You're freezing, and if you don't warm up soon, you're going to go into hypothermic shock. Or whatever the alien equivalent is." Kael'thar's eyes narrowed. "And what do you propose, human? Do you have some miraculous solution to my predicament?" Lena hesitated for a moment, then sighed. "Look, I know you're not going to like this, but body heat is the fastest way to warm someone up. So, you're going to have to get in bed with me." Kael'thar stared at her, his golden eyes wide with disbelief. "You cannot be serious." "Dead serious," Lena replied, crossing her arms over her chest. "I'm not letting you die on my floor because you're too proud to share a bed. So, unless you've got a better idea, you're going to have to suck it up and deal with it." Kael'thar's mind raced. The idea of sharing a bed with a human was preposterous, humiliating even. But as another violent shiver racked his body, he realized he had no other choice. His pride would not save him from the cold. "Fine," he growled, his voice low and reluctant. "But if you attempt anything untoward, I will not hesitate to defend myself. Lena snorted. Trust me, you're not my type. Now come on before you turn into an icicle. She grabbed his arm and pulled him to his feet, ignoring his protests as she dragged him toward the small bed in the corner of the cabin. Kael'thar stumbled after her, his pride warring with his survival instincts. Lena climbed into the bed first, pulling back the thick fur covers and motioning for him to join her. Kael'thar hesitated for a moment, then reluctantly slid in beside her, his massive frame taking up most of the space. The bed was small, and their bodies were pressed together out of necessity, but Kael'thar stiffened at the contact. Relax, Lena said, her voice softer now. I'm not going to bite. Just try to get some rest, okay? We'll figure things out in the morning. Kael'thar said nothing, his body tense as he lay beside her. But as the warmth of the bed began to seep into his scales, he felt his muscles slowly relax. The human's body heat was surprisingly effective, and for the first time in days, he felt the cold receding. Despite himself, Kael'thar closed his eyes and allowed himself to drift into an uneasy sleep. The next morning, Kael'thar awoke to the sound of the wind still howling outside. He was surprised to find that he was no longer shivering, his body warm and rested. He turned his head and saw Lena still asleep beside him, her breathing slow and even. For a moment, he simply watched her, his golden eyes studying her features. She was different from what he had expected. Humans were supposed to be weak, cowardly creatures, but Lena had shown a strength and resilience that he could not help but admire. As if sensing his gaze, Lena's eyes fluttered open, and she blinked up at him. Morning, she said, her voice groggy. You look better. Feeling okay? Kael'thar nodded, his usual gruffness softened by the events of the night. I am adequate, thanks to you. Lena smiled faintly. Don't mention it. I couldn't just leave you out there to freeze. Kael'thar hesitated, then spoke again. Why did you help me? You had no reason to. Lena shrugged. Because it was the right thing to do. And because I know what it's like to be alone in the cold. Kael'thar studied her for a moment, then nodded. You have my gratitude, human. I will not forget this. Lena's smile widened. Good. Now how about some breakfast? I got some canned beans and coffee. It's not exactly gourmet, but it'll keep us going. Kael'thar allowed himself a small smirk. I suppose it will have to suffice. As Lena got up and began preparing their meal, Kael'thar found himself reflecting on the strange turn of events. He had come to this planet as an exile, a warrior without a purpose. But now he felt a glimmer of something he had not felt in a long time. Hope. Perhaps, he thought, this frozen world was not so cursed after all.